lot of issues going on locally that has some people really questioning the priorities of not just the private sector, but also the public sector in new projects that are being proposed. Some have been proposed for much longer than I've been alive. Others are pretty fresh, and a lot of attention on one particular aspect. As I'm heading south on I-55, I see a big billboard. It says, no CO2 pipeline, no private gain for, public property. So I do want to focus on that first here, but joining us in studio to talk about that and about the future of Hunter Lake, which, if you're not familiar with that history, surely we'll get some of that history. Joining me right now on the left is Nick Dodson, and on his right is Don Hanrahan. I guess it's your left, Don Hanrahan. Gentlemen, thanks for taking time with us this morning. How you doing?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So I do want to get your response, Nick, to this comment I got from State Representative Wayne Rosenthal, and we'll have this air so that you can hear it and really get your response to kind of the recognition that this idea of a proposed CO2 pipeline from ADM and also from another organization, not too popular when you get down to the local level. Here's what State Representative Wayne Rosenthal had to say.
The carbon sequestration and the CO2 pipeline, the stakeholders couldn't come together. For me, the big thing is the specs on the pipe itself, because what they're using is the specs for pumping oil, and this is high pressure liquid CO2, which is 2,200 psi. So those are things I think that are important. A lot of discussions to go on. None of them are there yet. So we'll see what the stakeholders come up with and how we go.
And the representative, he talked about how you've got the farm bureaus on board and the manufacturers associations on board, but the more local you get, he says, the farmers aren't on board with this.
Correct. So ultimately, the way we see it, carbon dioxide is much, much different than oil, much, much different than natural gas. Carbon dioxide is an asphyxiant in which it actually displaces oxygen. So down in Satarsha, Mississippi, there was actually a CO2 pipeline eruption. It sent about 50 people to the hospital and made about 300 some people evacuate. When first responders responded to the quote-unquote mystery illness, they pulled in and their cars shut down because there was not enough oxygen to keep the cars running. People were walking around foaming from the mouth. This is unlike any other proposed pipeline in history. Nonetheless, Navigator is trying to have their maiden voyage of a carbon dioxide pipeline be a 1,300-mile pipeline, and they've never managed one single mile of CO2 pipeline. So I think it's extremely dangerous to even consider.
You guys are from the Sierra Club, both Nick and Don. One of the I guess promotions of this is it's supposed to help with the environment. You're supposed to be capturing this byproduct from industrial waste, and then they're going to pipe it in, and maybe sometime in the future they'll figure out how they can use that for energy. Is that enough of a risk to take here?
No, absolutely it's not. I mean, if you actually track the path of this pipeline and you hear out what the people that live near, that farm near, that work near these pipelines, it's extremely scary to these people. There are people that I love that are 400, 500 feet away from where this pipeline would be. And effectively, if that pipeline erupted there, they would have to be able to run 5 miles away to even be able to breathe again. It creates an actual plume that spreads in a dispersion model out like almost like a nuclear eruption. Like imagine something spreading outward like that.
Well, it looks more like the dry ice machines.
Yes.
It's very low level.
Yes.
It doesn't just go up into the air. It's very low
oxygen.
level and
right.
just
Well, and then they have to sequester it somewhere. So they pump it into the ground and claim that, it'll stay there for, 500 years? Is this company going to be there in 50 years even?
Right.
When it starts leaking out? It's a bad idea.
So obviously a lot more to be said about the CO2 pipeline. Nick, what are those next steps? Of course, you've got the Illinois Commerce Commission that's looking at this, and even an engineer from the ICC said, no, this is not a good idea. It's not for the public good.
Right.
The governor has even put this on his radar as well. What do you think is going to happen here?
That's a great question. I'm not sure. The Sangamon County Board did pass a moratorium against carbon capture sequestration as well as against the pipeline. We're extremely proud of them to do that. The public showed up. I believe it was probably the highest attended county board zoning meeting in history. They had seats for about 400, about 500 of us showed up, and a lot of farmers, landowners, environmentalists, conservationists, green energy folks all have that interesting class intersectionality that usually you don't see, and everybody coming together and saying not here, not now, was a very powerful statement to the county board, and I absolutely commend them for listening to people and participating in democracy actively.
Yeah, what does it say when a lot of times you guys in the Sierra Club clash with farmers?
Sure.
The WATUS rule, for instance, Waters of the U.S. and other environmental concerns about runoff of various pesticides or what it may be, and those are legitimate debates to have, and you guys have those. But talk about, I guess, just this idea of, it seems a lot of people who are on opposite sides at one point are coming together on this issue to forcefully oppose this.
I think it's a beautiful thing, honestly, whenever you do see those intersectionalities of concerns. Maybe they're not the exact same reasons, but to be completely honest, it's all for, honestly, community health, land health. We have some of the best agriculture areas in the entire country, and to have a pipeline that will, again, they act like it won't actually ruin it through the pathway. We know it will. All pipes do that. All buried pipelines do it. It's an absolutely disingenuous statement to say that it won't. And to allow, the fossil fuel industry, the lobbyist class, and several elected officials that are benefiting from this financially to say, yes, this is a good idea for, quote unquote, the environment, and they center around that. And in my opinion, whenever the lobbyists come together, when the fossil fuel industry comes together, and when the ruling class of political parties come together and say, oh, this is a good idea, that makes me pause, Greg.
We're talking with Nick Dodson and Don Hanrahan, both from the Sangamon Valley Sierra Club. And I want to come back and talk a bit about something else that's totally different from the CO2 pipeline, but it's a conversation that people in the Springfield area have been having for, Don, how long? 50?
Since the mid-'60s.
Oh, geez. So you're talking like almost 80 years here?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. So we'll talk about Hunter Lake, or Lake 2. We've got a new administration. Jim Langfelder's no longer mayor. Misty Buscher's mayor. What's the plan moving forward? Are we actually going to have a second lake? So stay tuned. That's coming up here with Springfield's Morning News on WMAY. Back at it with Don Hanrahan and Nick Dodson here with Springfield's Morning News. They are from the Sangamon Valley Sierra Club, and one of the things that, Don, you're here to focus on is something that's been discussed longer than I've been alive, longer than you've been alive. This thing has been, or I guess not, no?
Just barely. I was born in 57, and they started talking about it in 56.
That's unreal. So we'll get to the latest here on what's up with Lake 2, Hunter Lake. It's a proposed backup lake for the city of Springfield. All kinds of different ideas have been floated, no pun intended, as to what this lake could possibly be. But, Don, what is the latest here that people need to know about? Okay,
so this is the city's fourth attempt to get a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. The other three failed. I won't belabor that, but the permit application was renewed in 2016. And they finally completed a supplemental environmental impact study. It's published on the CWLP website, and you can review it. It's long, it's lengthy, it's got a lot of supplements, and it's intimidating looking. But when you get into it, you find out all kinds of problems. But the status right now is that once that's published, there's 45 days within which to file written comments. Anybody can comment. So we're in that 45-day period that started running on August 11th, I think. It ends on Monday, September the 25th. That's the last day you can submit comments. Tomorrow is an open house at Lincoln Library from 5 to 7, where the Army Corps is hosting a kind of an open meeting for people to come and ask questions and submit comments. You can submit comments right there at the meeting tomorrow night. That's the status. Once the Army Corps gets all the comments, wades through them, answers the questions, they will come to a decision. Should they issue the permit or should they not? So that, again, is tomorrow night at Lincoln Library. Wednesday night, Lincoln Library, the Army Corps of Engineers taking public comment. Has this been publicized? Because this is the first time I've heard of it. Very poorly. In fact, I think WMAY has done a good job of talking about it. But the city hasn't done anything more than one notice in their neighborhood news, and City Water, Light and Power is mum, and the Army Corps hasn't advertised it. So other than the initial drop of the notice published in the Federal Register, they haven't done much to publicize it. The Sierra Club has.
We'll see if the city council tonight brings this up at all. Of course, they have a meeting. And we'll review whatever they have to say with the council roundup Wednesday morning. But Wednesday night at Lincoln Library, get out there. The Army Corps of Engineers taking public comments about a proposed backup lake. So, Don, this thing has been talked about for 60 years or so, if not more. What were the conversations like when you were growing up in the area?
Well, when I was growing up, you could build a dam just by deciding to build a dam and pour the concrete, and there you go. Things have changed. When rivers started bursting into flames and people got angry about it, even Richard Nixon was angry about it, and they signed the National Environmental Policy Act. So the discussion when I was young was about clean water, and they stopped purchasing land for Hunter Lake, and Commissioner Henneberry, the head of City Water, Light and Power, said we don't even need it. So it went dormant for a long time until the late 80s. And then I went away to school. I came back, and the first thing I saw is they want to build that lake again? Really? This is 1988. And the first city council that took over from the commission form of government voted in the middle of a drought to approve Hunter Lake and to go ahead with it. So that was the discussion all those years ago.
Yeah, 40 years ago, some odd close to it. And then you've got, of course, another drought that happened in the 2000s, I think around like 2008 or so. And that spurred on another conversation here. But the idea of it's changed quite a bit. A backup water supply, a way to, help out the City Water, Light and Power energy generation. But now they're talking about recreation. What exactly kind of recreation would even be allowed on Hunter Lake, if it's allowed to permit?
Well, interestingly, it's a lake that's going to be used to keep Lake Springfield full. And that means in a typical year, they're going to draw it down 6.5 feet. You know what Lake Springfield looks like when it goes down 2 or 3 feet. Right. There's mud flats. People are complaining because they can't get their boats out. So Hunter Lake is not going to be a very pretty lake. And they've said, Mayor Langfelder said at public meetings, there will be no swimming in Hunter Lake. Swimming is the biggest thing that their supposed recreational needs study said what people wanted. So they're going to not allow that. They're not going to allow motorboats of any size. It's going to be like Sancris, no more than 25 horsepower probably. There's no jet skiing allowed, no water skiing allowed. They will allow some, bird watching, I guess, and they will allow kayaks and canoes and fishing boats. Although I really question what kind of a fishery it's going to be. If you're going to draw it down 6 feet in an average year and 9 feet in a dry year and 12 feet in a drought, how are those fish going to live? Certainly not bass. Bass can't survive that kind of change. So I don't know what kind of fishery it's going to be.
So we know that former Mayor Jim Langfelder really championed this idea. Where does Mayor Misty Buscher stand on this?
It's a good question. Prior to the election, I talked to Mayor Buscher, and she was very concerned about the costs, which have now come in, according to CWLP, at $153 million more that has to be spent without even including maintenance of it. So she's concerned about that because the city has huge other infrastructural needs. For example, she's concerned about maintaining what we got. Lake Springfield has lost 20% of its capacity, filled with phosphorus-laden mud that has to be taken out. You can't leave it there. It has to be maintained. And she's concerned about that cost. She's concerned about the costs of our aging water mains. 250 miles are past their useful life. Those cost almost $1 million a mile to replace. So she's very concerned about costs. And during the campaign, she said, if we get the permit from the Army Corps, then the people of Springfield need to decide are we going to spend this money or not? So that's, I think, where she stands. She's questioning the costs because that's going to, right now we've got cheap water, but that's just because City Water, Light, and Power has deferred maintenance for so many years on these other projects that are very costly.
Obviously, a important issue, one that is going to be discussed even further when the Army Corps of Engineers holds public comments at Lincoln Library Wednesday evening. What time does that start?
5 o'clock.
5 o'clock. So don't be late. Be there and have your voice be heard, whether you support this or you don't. Something I think that everybody needs to, especially in the area, needs to sound off on. Well, a couple of major issues talked about. Nick Dodson and Don Hanrahan, thank you guys so much from the Sangamon Valley Sierra Club being with us on WMAY.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
It is Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and